morning and welcome to another very special edition of the TOS podcast. I'm here with Jimmy Kempton, a man of many talents who's been betting for a long time. Has a great deal of knowledge that we're really looking forward to delving into. One thing to say, thank you very much to our sponsors, BetDex, a leading cryptocurrency exchange, currently with a 0% commission offer for October. No restrictions for winners, and a really interesting way of getting your bets on, and an alternative to the current system that we have. Something we'll talk about with Jimmy a little bit later on. So first of all, how you doing, Jimmy? How you doing on this cold, wintry morning?
Well, I'm not sure where you are, Neil, because up in Lincoln, it's beautiful, mate. I've been out for a walk, took me cup of tea, sun's shining, mate. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, mixed weekend of results for me betting wise, but yeah, looking forward to getting down and chatting a little bit about my very lengthy life story.
Yes. So just for any listeners, it was a really interesting just having a chat with Jimmy sort of before the podcast, and he sent me a potted history of all the things he's done. I think there's definitely enough in there for a memoir. One thing I'll start off with in chronological order because it's quite interesting. So for talking about myself personally, I came to betting quite late. It wasn't kind of something I knew people around me doing, or if it was, it was like, oh, my mate's dad was in the bookies, and it was like he got caught there, and it was a kind of really bad thing. So for me growing up, gambling was kind of seen as a very negative vice, and it wasn't something I saw lots of people doing. It wasn't normalized for me. But something I noticed you mentioned was you actually were ahead of the game. So you were a bookie at your school, pricing up golf and first goal scorer markets for your football matches for the sixth form.
Yeah, for sixth form team. Well, to be fair, the golf thing, it was more pricing up Nick Faldo because it was the only golfer that anybody had ever heard of. It was sort of like the mid 90s. I walked past my bookmakers just near where I live, JH Hicks. Shout out for that. It's now been taken over by Coral. And I saw Nick Faldo was available 7-1, and I thought, oh crikey, I could maybe get some of the kids at school interested. So obviously, as a kid, don't really understand the odds. Priced him at evens, took loads of money on it.
Okay.
Wasn't savvy enough in the day to then think about hedging it, asking me dad to go and back some of it. So I carried about a £30 liability to win the Open. He finished sort of middle of the pack and never really looked back, and then branched out into first goal scorer markets. I mean, the over round on those would have, well, disgusting really, because again, I didn't really understand how I was pricing things. And yeah, it kind of got me hooked really.
I mean,
I
there's a
mean,
sort of
it's
seven to one 7-1 value shot, and you're offering evens is it's kind of the modus operandi of the industry at the moment. So I think you were kind of
yeah,
ahead
I
of
think
the
that,
time
that,
in
that get,
terms of what's going on with pricing now.
yeah, that'll get a few with the head of trading interested in me if I can carry that one off again.
Did he win, or did you?
No, he finished middle of the pack. I pocketed me 30 odd quid. I was working as a paper boy, so switched on as I was thinking, even if he wins, that's only my paper money for the week. So I had it covered anyway. And yeah, kind of went from there. The betting empire started.
I'm fascinated with this with pricing up the goal scorer markets for six form games, because something I say to people who are asking about learning how to bet, and friends of mine, when I sort of explain what I do and how to understand pricing, one of the things I recommend is just think about markets in your head, about random things like if you're at work or in the office, what are the odds on who's going to be like the last person to come in, or if someone's always late, give a price on, or a spread on like how many minutes, and just start thinking about things around you, the odds. I mean, I kind of do it all the time, with my daughter, like, is it an evening shot that she's going to sort of whinge, what I make for dinner, like, is she actually going to eat it? So I find that really interesting. So how did you go about pricing up a first goal scorer market for the six form games, especially considering, like, where the players aware you were doing this, was there room to manipulate that?
Yeah, I mean, well, it was pinned up on the common room wall. It was until the head of sixth form came in one day and ripped it down. Interestingly, he was a big betting fan himself, and I can't confirm or deny whether he actually placed a bet off site with me on one of the games. But to be honest, Neil, it's actually really interesting because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't know about over rounds, betting to 100%. I literally just priced things up from numbers that I'd heard in the bookmakers. I'm a 16-year-old lad. I've heard of 6 to 4, 2 to 1. I'm not working on over rounds. I mean, the over round will probably be about 300% on it. I was only doing our team to score. Now, I was okay doing football. I did get caught out when I branched out into rugby, and I only priced up wingers and scrum halves. And then I think there was a little bit of skullduggery one game where they fixed it so the number 8 actually scored the first try for us coming out the back of the pack. And I priced him up at 8 to 1, and that completely cleaned me out, to be honest, mate. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it, and I think such a really good point there about trying to price things up for yourself. And that is my number one tip. I know we're probably getting ahead of where we want to be, but just price things up yourself. And people always say to me, oh, you should do it on paper first. Well, I think that's all well and good, but I think especially now where you've got such sort of accurate data available on the exchanges, on your actual just your standard betting sites, you kind of do 50p bets on things and try and price things up and actually have some form of actual profit and loss rather than a paper profit and loss, because everything always looks good on paper, but until you actually start doing it with real money, um, you never really find out just how good you might be. And I was pricing things up and I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but over time I gradually gained more skills and I got better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things as well is it's an ever evolving process and there's so much to learn. So if you have the motivation to sharpen your skills and it's never ending as well, you know, things just don't ever stay the same and it's constantly evolving. So it's a great way to start. And so so you were around sort of the early days of Betfair then. So that was
Oh
something
yeah.
you were involved in the forums. That's something Pete talks about a lot. Obviously, for myself, I came to Betfair sort of quite late, so I think a lot of the opportunities that were there in the early days, markets had already kind of adjusted for that. People were kind of wise to some of the things. So, what was it like, kind of in the early days, once you first kind of discovered the exchanges and that you could actually sort of lay off bets and positions, and what kind of things were you doing on the exchange?
It was kind of revolutionary, really, as everybody will talk about who were first in it at the beginning. The prices were so wrong, Neil. Um, Looking back, we have no idea how wrong they were, to be perfectly honest. I mean, my speciality is League Two, and League Two is a completely unique league, I think, in world football, really, in the way it's ran, the, the pricing of it, the mentality of the players. It's a very unique league, and once you get delving into it, you can find some real value. But the bookmakers are pricing it like Premier League games, and literally, it was a license to print money. But we didn't realise how much of a license it was at the time. We were still undertaking those cautious beliefs because analytics were around, but they weren't really being used. Um, Again, I mean, I always talk about my background in as a kid. I was always very interested in maths, always very interested in stats. I used to play endless hours of dice cricket, which it's all analytics, but I didn't know them to be analytics then. It was just what I did. In the early days of the Betfair exchange and the forum, um, it was an incredible time to be alive in terms of meeting new people. And when I say meeting, it was all that sort of unknown, that virtual, oh, I know this guy, Jimmy K, or other names on the forum that you started to trust. And you could really just make money by following the crowd, really.
Did you happen to get trolled by Johnny sort of on the forums at the time, or did you come
No,
across?
I don't think I ever really came across Johnny, to be fair, in my time there. There's a number of people who I still keep in contact who still work in the industry, still make a sideline, whether it be in psychology side of betting, which I've come into a lot more over the last few years, um, using sort of manager quotes and things like that, and trying to understand things that the analytics might not always tell you. But the forum, it was fantastic. I think it also helped, Neil. It coincided in the time of my life where I was kind of flitting between jobs, didn't really always have enough money to go out and do the things that I wanted to do. So I was at home a lot on my own. As an only child, I've always been able to amuse myself, but I really threw myself into the Betfair forum and gleaned a lot of knowledge, and far more knowledge than I probably ever realised I'd gained at the time, to be honest,
So something you mentioned with the with League Two. Sorry, there's a little bit of echo on my mic. I'll try. So something you mentioned with League Two about it being a unique league, and you touched on a few of those things. But could you explain in a bit more detail? So what is it about League Two, like about those points you made, like, that makes it so different? And also, is that something that's endured over time? So, kind of, let's say over the last 10, 20 years, as the changes to football, to grassroots, the funding, new ownership, are those things still, just as relevant today? Specifically, what is it that kind of bookies are getting wrong on that league in particular?
Yeah, so bookmaking in League Two has completely evolved. It's got far more accurate prices, are a lot more tighter, but the sort of actual reality of League Two football is there are real people who play in League Two. They have real struggles for the most part, unless you get teams like Wrexham and that who come in and are bankrolled. And but the bottom half of League Two, they are very much still working men, and they have the same roles and responsibilities off the pitch as myself and you do in terms of supporting the family, looking after their families, their children. Uh, Over time, I've known a few people who've played lower league professional football, and they're just like me and you, mate. They have the same sort of fears about job security as any other person does, and I think a lot of that isn't priced into things. It's like away games. You get certain teams playing in away games later on in the season. Well, at the beginning of the season in League Two, most teams will stay over. No, not the back end of the season. If you're mid-table with nothing to play for, your chairman is not authorising a £1,500, £2,000 overnight hotel stay. That's a big impact. Midweek games, something I picked up on very early on in the 2000s when I started working for somebody predominantly on League Two. Away teams on a Tuesday night do very well. I think there was a spell in 2003 where only 6 of 54 Tuesday night games were won by the home team.
Only six.
Yeah. And that, now you can dress it up. Some of it will be fixture sort of scheduling. The better team will be the away team, etc. But at the end of the day, a lot of that comes down to human psyche, and players maybe having to go and pick the kids up from school. They've got a home game, so the missus is like, "Well, I'm at work. You go and pick the kids up. You're not working till 6 o'clock tonight." You've got them wife working because not earning much in League Two. You need two salaries. So you're at home all day. You're not playing till tonight. Get the washing on. I've left you a list of jobs to do. All those sorts of things that the away team travelling, they're on a business trip. I know that's something that they talk about very often in American sport. They're on a business trip. They're on the bus, having a bit of camaraderie. They're getting in that game mindset all day. They're talking about what they're going to do on the way to the game. All those sorts of things that Premier League players, Championship players, possibly even League One players these days don't really need to worry about with salaries of from £2,000 a week upwards. League Two, I mean, I work for a high street bank now, Neil. Used to work down in the city, but I work standard high street retail banking job now. I'll probably earn more than some of the players that play for Accrington and Morecambe. These are young lads looking to make their way in the game, and they're the sort of modern day life things that sometimes bettors and bookmakers overlook.
And so would that apply to other leagues then? So is there anywhere where, again, the salaries are not, going to be sort of extremely comfortable, and in terms of retirement for
Yeah,
players, they'll have to go back into, into other industries. So kind of looking around the world or at other sports even where,
yeah, yeah.
there.
I'm sure that will translate across leagues, across continents. Um, Sadly, I've not got the time to or have the time to look into that, but I'm sure that's something, and especially those midweek games. Again, I've not delved too deep into it, and obviously, as prices have changed, that also throws in that different dynamic of okay, they're a bit longer now. The away team are they, or a bit shorter? Sorry, are they automatically value now at that price point? Back in the day, League Two home team would normally be favourite in a game until at least February. You would rarely get an away favourite. I mean, this Friday night, Chesterfield travelled to Newport and they were minus three quarters of a goal favourite. The away team priced about 1.7. That would never have happened 20 years ago. Chesterfield probably been about 6-4 for that game. They're now 7-10. That's how the markets have adjusted. I mean, they needed to adjust because the smarter punters came into the betting arena in the lower leagues, they'd have got destroyed.
And with teams coming up from the conference, for example, let's say with teams coming up from the Championship into the Premier League, there's lots of kind of data going a long way back that, most teams coming up are going to be favourites to go back down again. Is the gap between, let's say, League Two and the conference smaller than it was before? Is it kind of much the same as it was, let's say, 10 years ago? When you're looking at pricing those teams that have actually been promoted, what kind of things would you be looking at with them?
Yeah, I normally give teams that have been promoted from the Vanarama League a slight boost early on, because there's a lot of momentum around the club. They tend to keep the same level of the same players in that's gained them success. They often give the opportunity to those that have got them to the football league to carry on, and often that momentum and team spirit continues. The bigger teams, your Wrexhams, your Stockports, your Notts Counties, there's always much more of a chance of a double bounce straight through the leagues. Very rarely will a team from League Two go up to League One and go straight through, or League One to the Championship. But at this level of the game, there's much more of a chance of a double bounce through. Teams very rarely get relegated straight back down. There's normally too much of momentum. The teams that are struggling at the bottom of League Two tend to have so much going wrong internally that the success of the newly promoted team will normally carry them through at least one season. So I would never normally look to back a team to go straight back down again. More chance of them going straight through into League One, to be honest.
Okay. So is that something you look at as well on the anti-post markets, sort of, just before the season? So would you say that there's opportunities there, or are bookmakers kind of sharp to that on, teams that have been promoted, or just in general, are there kind of inefficiencies that you notice, sort of like at the beginning of the season, where some teams are being overrated, underestimated, internal factors, like you say, not being considered?
I think sometimes if you follow the league long enough, you kind of almost see a natural expiry date on certain teams and their ability levels. I mean, I'm heavily on Accrington at 11-2 to get relegated this year. They're sat, I think they're in 22nd or 21st spot at the moment. They're struggling down the bottom of the table. I just sense they're a small club. They've punched above their weight a long time. Over time, there's always been a natural expectancy from the bookmakers that they'll get out of trouble. A little bit like Everton, to be honest, in the
Mm.
Premier League. They've been underperforming for a number of years. At some point, you would think they would go down, and I'm on them 11-2 to go down. They normally price up the weaker of the newly promoted teams as the favourite to go down. So I think Bromley were favourites this year. I mean, I wouldn't be backing Bromley to go down because, as I say, it's that new impetus that every time a Bromley fan goes to a home game this season, they're seeing somebody new. Some
Mm.
of them are really big games. You like welcoming the likes of Notts County, proper atmosphere for that game. Other big clubs coming down there, sorts of things that those supporters have never seen before. They're going away to new grounds. They may not have the greatest playing staff, but they will put in performances on new grounds. The likes of Accrington and Morecambe players who've been in and around the bottom end of the table for a number of years, it's not new for them. It's not new for their fans. Are they really going to get up for certain games? And I think that's the reason why I just sense certain teams have an expiry date at the bottom end of League Two. And you do find, whether I get it right this year or next year, certain teams will fall out of the EFL League Two.
Yeah. So their days are numbered eventually.
Yeah,
Accredited.
yeah. I mean, you can only keep beating the odds for
Yeah.
so long. I mean, every year Harrogate are priced to go down, but they've got an incredibly stable management and board. And whilst that manager is there, there is no way I'll be backing them to go down. And I think that's something that's really undervalued in League Two is a stable board and a stable management structure that has belief in the players and there's a almost confidence within the players that they can make mistakes. Because if you feel I've learned from watching a lot of League Two football, if you're playing in an environment where you feel you can't make a mistake, those players will make mistakes because they're not good enough not to.
Mm.
So if they're playing in a comfortable, stable environment where they feel able to make mistakes without any sort of fear of, being dropped or anything like that, they'll actually probably make less mistakes. It's all about the environment at League Two level as well, how comfortable the players feel.
Would you say something like training facilities, uh, are they a significant edge or like for some of the sort of bigger clubs who've kind of dropped down the divisions, like, the likes of sort of Notts County compared to, other smaller sides where their sort of facilities are of a better nature or, their academies, for example, like, how does that play out in the season? Or sometimes does it actually not make as much of a difference as you might think?
I think it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. You can create if you've not got the greatest of facilities, you can create that sort of everybody's against us, sort of siege mentality type atmosphere, which depending on your playing style, if you're playing quite a robust physical style, maybe a bit more direct than other teams, I think at League Two level, that can actually kind of help you, that feeling that it's just you against the world. If you're a team such as the likes of Notts County at the moment or Grimsby, who are wanting to get the ball down and pass it to death, then facilities are important because you need good surfaces to work on your routines. And you also need good facilities to attract those better ball players that you want to come into your club to make your squad stronger. You need to show them that you've got the facilities that will, separate you from the other options. Because that's the other thing as well. The better players you want to attract, the more competition you're going to have for those signatures. So you have to offer something slightly different, which is why the likes of Notts County at the top of the table with their facilities, their ground will be more appealing. If it's a toss up between Notts County and Crewe, who are you going to sign for? It's going to be County.
So it's a podcast that I'm planning, which I'm quite looking forward to. You might find quite interesting. A friend of mine who's playing in the second division in Finland, but he was playing, I think, two levels below the conference in the UK. Was playing in the US as well. So I'm going to be sort of talking to him. But it was quite interesting to see, even hearing his experiences, sort of playing for clubs in England. Like there was just a total difference between some clubs he was at where they actually had like proper hot meals and like half decent facilities, and other places where he was just getting changed in a shed, just coming onto the pitch. So
and I do think sometimes there's a lot made of great facilities and the hot meals and staying around. That all comes into that, what sort of environment are you in? Are you in a winning run? If you're on a winning
Yeah.
run, then everybody sat round having a meal after training is brilliant. It's camaraderie, it's team building. Like those long journeys, if you're coming back, if you're on a good run or going to a game, winning runs, brilliant. If you're on a losing run and you're being, in quotes, forced to stay around to have a meal with the lads who aren't really putting a shift in, or you're on a long bus journey, they're the other things, especially at League Two level, where you live quite a condensed lifestyle. Often, sometimes players are living with each other, depending on the arrangements, where they're staying in a town 3 or 4 nights a week to facilitate training if they live a lot further away. Sometimes that can be really sort of claustrophobic if you're on a
Mm.
losing run. Um, and again, that's why listening, I find particularly interesting listening to some of the players and managers' interviews. I think you can gain a lot from those subtle nuances that you hear when you listen to them speak.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you as well is, like myself, you've spent time working for a syndicate, and I know in terms of my days, these were things that were looked at. The things that you've touched on that maybe the casual better won't really be considering or looking at in the pricing, and arguably a lot of bookies, maybe pricing it to some extent, but perhaps there's inefficiency there as well. So again, things like the living arrangement you mentioned, things like chairman not willing to put money towards just staying overnight. The extension of travel times, what kind of impact that has, because I guess all these things in themselves are very marginal, but then if there are like 7 or 8 different things like that, those can actually add up to maybe a 5% inefficiency in the price, even potentially 10% inefficiency in the price, and bookmakers are slow to catch on to it. The betting public aren't really looking at it. So I guess it's kind of clear, doing your research and sort of being prepared, for it would be quite useful. So in your days working for a syndicate, kind of what kind of things were you looking at when you were previewing games? Kind of how much time did you spend, let's say, on the research side of things to kind of prepare your analysis and to get to the stage of betting? And also, by the way, in this murky world of syndicates, if there's anything that you can't sort of discuss in too much detail, that's totally fine. But whatever you can share, sure will be useful for the listeners.
Yeah, well, I know you've worked for a syndicate relatively recently, haven't you, Neil? I came in sort of now 2024, probably getting on for nearly 20 years ago. I started working for one of the largest syndicates. And again, it was put in contact with them through a third party who I then spoke to. And they sent me a template, Neil, to be perfectly honest. It was almost like a Microsoft Word. This is how I want it structured: game, venue, time, um, key personnel missing for either side, any knowledge of any pitch conditions, and then a sort of brief write up. Now, effectively, what they were looking for were me to turn out a load of analytics. Now, at that stage in my betting journey, I wasn't really using analytics. I was just using my eyeballs, looking at the price and going. I wasn't even really pricing games up at that point. I was just looking, oh, Crikey, Darlington 2.1. Well, that's a bit too short. We'll lay that without any real sort of data driven analysis behind it. It was just me being in and around the lowest level of professional football, having been a season ticket holder at Lincoln as a child, knowing there's certain spots where teams will underperform, and that's not through any data driven analysis. That's just I've seen this story 20 times before because I've seen it with my own team. They won't win this weekend after what's happened. So I was filling out these templates to the best of my ability, but not really using any of the data analytics that I think they were really looking for. I mean, I was still achieving results for them, but it possibly wasn't produced to them in the manner that they probably wanted it, to be honest, mate. But again, I was still fulfilling what they wanted, still getting the results to a certain degree, not as successful as I had been previously, but then the markets were evolving at that time, and I possibly wasn't adjusting to them as they went, probably thinking it's going to be a brief overcorrection, when in fact it was just a movement to what we see to the present day. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed working for them. To be honest, they pretty much, I don't know what your experience was like, but they pretty much left me alone, to be honest. Just here's the template. I want you to complete it on as many games that you have a feel on this weekend, send it back to us, and then send us an invoice every month. It was very informal for for what they were paying me. I mean, it wasn't earning a fortune, but I was doing all right out of it. And my knowledge of how much they were betting based on what I was saying.
So okay, so your role was more to do the analysis, the previews of the game. So you weren't executing the bets
So
on your side,
I
right?
wasn't doing any kind of running, kind of execution. You mean, what are your thoughts this weekend on League Two? Here's a blank canvas. Talk about any game you want to, but if you do talk about a game, these are the formats that we want. And I'm presuming that was standardised across the world in terms of all that. I mean, I've got stories about how this syndicate used to employ somebody in a Spanish weather station telling them when it was going to rain in certain areas of Spain, so they could get on the unders in obscure Spanish markets. I mean, they're probably the biggest syndicate there is, and they were very good at what they did.
Yeah, the kind of the depths of the level of detail and preparation for this is kind of incredible. Something I definitely
I
uh,
mean, they only ever really contacted me once outside of normal times, and that was on a Saturday morning. I was preparing to get ready for one of my games because I still played Saturday football at that time, and they were betting a certain League Two game, and the price wasn't moving, and they couldn't understand why. Because no matter what game they bet, once they started filtering their money and the price, I won't say it crashed, but it trended in the direction that they wanted to, just sheer volume of money, and they thought the game was suspect. And I know full well that they reported it, and something quite suspect happened in that game, shall we say. And that was the only time in the 2 or 3 years that I worked for them that they actually contacted me outside of send me your template or send me your invoice. So yeah, they left me very much to do what I wanted, really.
and so sorry, a little bit of feedback there. At the moment, then, Jimmy, so what have you sort of been working on recently? What kind of sort of projects do you have? Obviously, you work in close association with Trade on Sports. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your laying service and your website focus on football.
Yeah, so my focused on football website. I work closely, very closely with Pete. It was on the other week with you. Excellent podcast. If you've not listened to it, I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
And effectively, I got in contact with Pete about sort of 10 years ago, really. And I sent him a message saying, really love your podcast. If you don't mind me saying, I think you might get a bit of value from somebody else coming on occasionally, because although the stats and trends are really good, just yourself on it, sometimes you could just bounce off somebody else. And he messaged me back. He said, brilliant. Yeah, you're coming on next week. And I'm like, sorry. And he's like, no, you've said this. You're coming on. If that's what your feedback is. I said, okay. And then I've been on every podcast since, to be honest.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and work like he helps me with my website. I'm not the most technical, to be honest, mate. So he helps me load everything up. We've got the lay-in service, which is again sort of looking at those lower league games where there isn't so much liquidity, but there's probably more opportunity because of that. You find in the higher levels, the liquidity is so huge that the margins, the edge that you get is normally sort of worked out of it before you even get a chance to look at the market. Whereas the lower leagues, you're probably not getting as much value because you're probably having to take a higher price than you want, but there's less liquidity doesn't knock that sort of value out, if that makes sense. So we're doing that. I didn't have a great start, as I said to you before the podcast, mate. Do all the proofing and all the testing that you want, and first week everything goes tits up. But yeah, we're getting back onto the right track now, and you can sign up for that via the website, via Trade on Sports website or focusedonfootball.co.uk. Do all my blogs every week. Had a great run with my League Two blogs first 9 this season won. Um, we lost at the weekend, which in some ways I'm almost pleased about. I know I shouldn't say that, but when you get on such a good run, you feel the pressure build up on you so much that you start thinking which game should you put forward, and I'd rather win 2 and lose 1 than win 9 in a row, if that makes any
No,
sense.
no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
The
absolutely.
pressure mounting up on you. So yeah, we do the podcast every week with Pete for the Premier League, and yeah, I found, to be honest, now there was a spell where I left my job in the city and started working on this full time. I was working for a syndicate that we spoke of, and also an Asian handicap firm where I was doing Blue Square games, which is now the Panorama National League. And again, I felt the pressure so much when it was my job to produce winners. I felt myself doubting myself, second guessing myself, trying to find a reason not to back what instinctively I should be backing, probably because I had so much time on my hands. Now I work full time. I do this almost as a full time hobby on the side, but I don't really have time to second guess myself because I've got to go off and do other things or get to work. So my first instinct, which is normally correct, is what I stick with. So yeah, it's a very busy life working full time and doing this, but I love it, mate. It's great. It's a great hobby. And even if you don't make any money, it's something that really keeps your brain active and keeps you sort of mentally stimulated all the time. So I would advise anybody to get involved in sports betting, even at a very low level. I mean, some of my mates, one of my best mates, he has a £1 accumulator. That's all he does, but he'll spend about 2 hours every week researching it. Well, to me, that's brilliant. That's great fun. It's a good hobby. It's a low cost hobby if you do it sensibly, and it's something that really keeps you mentally stimulated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I've said to my wife as well. You know, that is probably something I could be doing in my, or if I lived that long in, my 70s, and something that I wouldn't necessarily have to kind of retire from. You could kind of, gradually downscale what you're doing, and yeah, absolutely, it keeps you sharp, but at the same time, it, it can be kind of exhausting as well because it's never ending. So there's always markets to look at, there's always something you can be doing, there's always so I think that's a challenge for some people kind of wanting to take the next step, or to take it to that next level. And like you say about going full time, that's something, so I myself, that's kind of, most of my income is kind of reliant on it. And yeah, it's not easy. Like there are months where the mental strain is sort of quite
Yeah,
high, or you run the risk of kind of like losing that sort of joy, the fun of the process, because it can become a bit of a grind, and then and that pressure to do things. So definitely, I think it's great for people to have the kind of the spare time, and the best way to kind of bet again is well within your means,
yeah,
with what you can afford. And something I often say to people as well is, if you're getting an emotional reaction to losing a bet, you're staking way too much. It's kind of like the most it would be is like a minor annoyance, like a fly just landing on your head, and you just
yeah,
swat it away. And if it's any more than that, you need to look at kind of what you're staking, or what you're doing there, because um yeah, but that's a big challenge, like you say, the
yeah.
psychology of betting and trying to keep those emotions in check.
Well,
Um,
I had the draw in the Chesterfield Notts County game on Saturday lunchtime, and it was 2-1 going into injury time. Notts County get a penalty, score equalised 2-2. Bet comes in. I was watching it, and I was emotionless. In a way, I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? I've got a 3.8 winner in the last minute. But in a way, I was delighted I was emotionless because A, that's what I expected to happen, else I wouldn't have put the bet on. I thought that was the value. And B, it shows that that money that I'd staked wasn't that important to me. And I don't mean that in a bad way because it was a decent amount of money, but it shows that, like you say, I was betting well within my means. And if I'd lost that money, it's not going to impact on my mortgage payment or my gas bill or anything like that. It's not going to intrinsically affect my life. Um, And I learned something very interesting when I was in Vegas. I spent quite a bit of time in Vegas back in 2013, 2014. I lived out there for 6 months and I got to know quite a few people in the sports books. Um, and I got to know one of the sports book directors, and I was chatting to him one Sunday, and it was a game where all the favourites were losing. They were all losing. And I stood there with him, and he was like, "This is what your betting should be like. You want to be the only person cheering in the sports book because you want to be against everybody else in the sports book because the majority of people lose. So over time, if you can oppose the majority of the betting public, you'll win." And that's kind of stuck with me a lot. And it's actually have changed the way I bet a lot in sort of like football. It's like, can I find the underdog? Yes, the underdog might lose, but how many are they going to lose by? And
Mm.
the mentality of the favourite. We forget sometimes when we're looking at backing big favourites that actually Man City don't care if they cover a 2-goal handicap. They just want to win the game. At the end of the day, that's all Pep Guardiola's judged on, winning games. Margin of victory, he doesn't really care about. And that comes back to that feeling of emotionless betting and sometimes going against the crowd.
No, absolutely. I think that's kind of how Tony Bloom sort of innovated in the UK, didn't he, with Asian handicaps, and something that I think even still to this day, a lot of bettors just are unfamiliar with it, or there's something about betting on the Asian handicaps that just seems intimidating to people, which, hopefully over time, I mean, I think that has changed, and people are much more familiar with it, but it's still a thing in a way, but it's
I find the Asian handicap's the easiest way to bet to keep a record of things because
mm,
you're effectively betting even money and you'll either win or lose. And if you can hit 55%, you will earn a lot of money and you'll do very well. Whereas when you're backing teams at 2.4, or if you're laying teams at 2.4, what's your staking level? Are you doing to a certain liability per bet? It can be quite difficult with the traditional UK prices to try and come up with a correct betting strategy, which is why I've moved more towards Asians because you can effectively, well, same stake, 50-50 shot, let the market decide how good you are. If you can hit 53 to 57%, you'll do just fine. And learning to lose is another thing that I learned when I was out in Vegas a lot. Because I used to be a really bad loser. But I think you've got to accept the sooner you accept that you'll have a lot of losing bets, the happier you'll be, and the better you'll become. Because if you can go 3-2 on 50-50 shots, crikey, you'll make a lot of money. And that's what I was doing when I was betting in the NFL Super Contest. That's all I was looking to do. Go 3-2 every week. That's an incredible performance, really.
no, absolutely. It's I mean, with myself, I bet a lot on horse racing and golf at sort of double digit odds, so I'm quite used to losing and going on like really long losing runs. But
Well,
it's
that takes another kind of mental strength as well, doesn't it? To know that you're on a long run of losers, but at some point it'll turn.
Yeah, so actually a good example because it's quite sort of present at the moment. So again, I've been sort of betting on South American horse racing recently, sort of been tracking.
South
Uh,
American, whereabouts?
all over. I think there's tracks in Uruguay, Chile, and in Argentina. But yeah, without giving away too much, but
Oh, yeah, yeah, sorry.
but at the moment, there's from I don't know, sample of about just over 100 that I've taken this month, but I want to be sort of building that up.
Yeah,
The sort of roughly about sort of 40% move on prices on the bets I've taken. So, but let's say 40% closing line value, but these are kind of paper thin markets in terms of liquidity. So, that 40% sounds like a lot, but
yeah,
there's already a fair bit of margin in the market.
yeah.
But even then, let's say I've had let's say horses taking out 40 to 1, kind of moving into like 5 to 1, and quite a few times, 20 to 1's going into like sixes, sevens. And I think I've like I'm down quite a bit. Um, Barely any winners so far. And you would look at it, and probably there would be bettors looking at it thinking, what the hell am I doing wrong? And maybe, I'll come out of this and it'll bankrupt me. But when you're looking at the moves and
Yeah,
consistent moves, so you know, like 80%, 90% of 80 to 90% of those have moved in my
yeah,
favor. You've got every confidence to think, okay, well, it's going to turn, and
yeah,
it could be because if you stop now, that's it. Then you walk
yeah,
away. You've made those losses, but then it could turn around very quickly.
yeah,
With a small run of just a couple of horses, and suddenly swing back into profit. But it's an interesting approach because I guess I look at it as well and think, I kind of combine things. Um, Kind of these high odds on golf, you can go months without winning. Then you could win 2 weeks in a row, with golfers at 100 to 1. And but so it's um I think the way I approach it and sort of learning from, friends of mine in the space, what they do is just that volume, and just the hardest thing I think is just kind of keeping a consistent volume because
yeah,
I know there are services out there that are kind of quite selective, and that's a challenge because there's so much information that and research that goes into particular bets, but then again you could be a victim of variance, and that could take a little while to overturn. And then at the odds you're betting at as well, if it's kind of 50-50, people assume that taking these 50-50 bets, you're going to have a kind of, you win one, you lose one, you win one, you lose one. You could win five, or like,
yeah,
like yourself, you won nine in a row, right?
yeah,
And I'm sure it won't happen. Does it? But there's every possibility, even with sort of, when you're tossing a coin, you could
yeah.
still lose like,
9 in a row.
seven, yeah. So even at pure randomness, I think
Yeah,
people one thing that people don't realize until unless they have a background in the probability and kind of looked into it is these things happen more often than you think, and you could be a victim of horrendous luck or extremely good fortune, which will misguidedly make you stake more or have confidence that the next thing's coming. um
see,
you
I
know
think that your horse racing, the fact that the market's consistently moving in your favour shows you that you're clearly doing something right there. Now, I don't think I would have, for golf, take golf as an example, I don't think I've got the right psyche to bet golf. I need more winners than to go 6, 7 weeks in a tournament without a win. I don't think I could. And I think that's very much an individual thing. And
yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
because I don't have that golf background to understand that and already have that processed in my mind that I've got to accept that I lose quite a lot. I need more winners, if that makes sense. But I think it's also really important that you understand what kind of better you are as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And that's something with trade on sports as well. We've got a really interesting community, and I think there's some bettors in there who have and it's not meant as something unkind. It's just everyone's different on the spectrum of their risk tolerance. So there are bettors in there who want to take kind of lower risk strategies, and a lot of the time that is the sensible thing to do. Is again, to let's say if they're doing an in-play trade using our platform, again taking an early position to hedge out, or to green up on both sides. There's others who will kind of I'll give a shout out, to Tim Billington, who kind of hits lots of, big goal over lines in games. And I'm quite happy to, let that ride, and we'll take those losses, but what we'll get that kind of big winner eventually. And there's some people, like myself, who's somewhere in between. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's key, is understanding the kind of betting that you do. And like you say, because for most people, this is it's a hobby you can get better at and you can become more skilled at, like any hobby. But you've got to do it in a way that's enjoyable. And it's not something that you're going to kind of stick at and be motivated to continue. So yeah, absolutely. Like and again, there's nothing better than actually having winners and kind of seeing that in your account, and and it's all part of the game theory. Even when you look on your bookie, on the betting slips that have settled, there's kind of big flashing graphics and kind of colors when you win something, that'll kind of hook you into kind of doing more and more. But yeah, absolutely, it's really interesting. What one thing I wanted to ask, just to end on, is as I've mentioned before, our podcast is very kindly sponsored by BetDex, and they're a new entrant into the betting space, and really sort of trying to take on kind of the big boys of the betting space who've been here for a while. So, the other exchanges. There's a lot of talk online and grumbles about the industry in general, just the kind of state of things, just frustrations that winning gamblers have over the traditional soft bookmakers, but also just in terms of the operating practices of Betfair, or the maintenance on their sites, the issues they have there, the constant kind of requests for documents and things like that. And if you do become successful on Betfair, then you're sort of subject to this premium charge, and other operators have other things to some degree. So I'm curious your take. So with a company like BetDex, who are kind of putting this offering to the market, there's no commission, there's again no restrictions for bettors, and I think what again I find quite interesting, is quite unique to BetDex, is that they're kind of built on cryptocurrency. So you're trading in cryptocurrency. So I was just curious what you think about the state of the exchange at the moment, and sort of whether you think there's potential there for somewhere like BetDex, where people are basically, again, peer-to-peer trading with each other, but without this kind of without some of the issues that, for example, Betfair have.
Yeah, I think there's certainly room in the space for another player to come into the market, or multiple players, to be perfectly honest. The availability has shrunk over the years. We started initially with sort of Betfair 20 odd years ago. Then obviously we got BetDAC and other bookmakers then started increasing their offering to try and take on the exchanges. But then sadly, what we saw is that Betfair then became engulfed by a major player in terms of their sort of takeover. And we kind of resorted back to sort of the old days, it feels like, in terms of it very difficult to get a bet on. If you do well, you get blocked. I mean, I'm barred from nearly everybody. Some of that is down to sort of matched betting, where I took advantage of some of the match betting opportunities. But I don't think they've probably been too lax in the past, the bookmakers, in terms of their anti-money laundering sort of practices and that. And now they've gone too far the other way, where you're asking for documentation if you've trying to take out a few £100 in some places, I've been told. So there's definitely room now, and I think there's appetite as well, because I think there's a lot of money sat on the outside that would come back into the market. When you look at some of the volumes that you used to see on Betfair, BetDAC, there was money in League Two and League One and the lower leagues that has disappeared from the market. And I know that it's still out there. It's clearly going somewhere else, or it's been taken out of the market completely. So I think there's definitely opportunities out there for an aggressive player who wants to try and take us almost back in time to when Betfair was, I keep saying, it was revolutionary. The idea that I could have a bet with you, Neil, I've never met you. I could bet £10 that Gillingham will win. You don't think Gillingham will win, and we exchange a bet. It was mind blowing to us, to be honest. And I think there's a whole range of people like myself who would definitely get more involved again on the exchanges if that opportunity was there. So I definitely think there's room for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting times. I think, with everything going on in the UK, and with changes to gambling legislation, but also like the growth of gambling across, like, America, Latin America, all over Africa, all over the world, where things are maybe in a decline here, but actually globally you know,
Yeah.
and people are betting on, you know, on English football, and like, you know, I'm sure there's Accrington fans, you know, like across the world as well, kind of keeping an eye out for the scores. So yeah, Jimmy, thank you very, very much for joining me on the podcast. Really, really appreciate it. I think there's been some great insights, especially kind of a mini masterclass on looking at League Two, and some really like practical advice about, you know, what to kind of look out for, and how you can actually prepare and sort of process these things. Hopefully, we'll get to have you back on again at some point in the future. And I would definitely recommend for anyone who hasn't listened. So Jimmy and Pete both do a weekly podcast, kind of previewing the Premier League, and sometimes other fixtures as well. Really, really good analysis, lots of great stats and data, and, you know, great plays, totally for free. So, you know, do check out the channel. Those are also uploaded to YouTube, to Spotify, iTunes, maybe a couple of other platforms, but do keep a link there. And in the description as well, I'm going to leave a link to Jimmy's website, Focus on Football, so you can have a look. There's free selections that you can sign up to. So you leave your email address, you can get free selections there and free info, more information about Trade on Sports, and the laying service as well. So you know, do definitely check out Jimmy's website. And also, if you are interested in signing up to BetDex, the link is in the description below. There's also a QR code at the beginning of the video, and do give that a try. And please like and subscribe, comment, you know, nice things for Jimmy. If you want to leave abuse for me, that's fine. You know, engagement is good.
All me abuse for me, mate. I'm easy.
So yeah, do give that a try. So Jimmy, thank you very much, and you know, enjoy
Thanks,
your
Neil.
lovely sunny day in Lincoln, and we'll catch up soon.
Super.